If everybody who was coming here in these caravans and these mixed groups was capable of organizing themselves without outside assistance as effectively as they have in making their way to the United States, they would have already fixed all of the political problems that they claim to be fleeing.
I have somebody very special on the show today, somebody who can explain to you from authority what's going on inside our broken immigration system. I have an immigration judge, yes, on the show, a judge that was removed when Biden came into office, was gutted out of his job because he was put in place during the time President Trump was in office, and somebody who's going to tell you exactly what is going on and how he and others are fighting back for you to gain and regain control of this broken, failed immigration system that is destroying our country and destroying our sovereignty. And I think many of you saw Elon Musk at the border. And I saw the funniest things, on Twitter. I mean, it was on X. I have to get used to saying that. But Elon Musk on X live from Eagle Pass on the US-Mexico border, our southern border, with Congressman Tony Gonzalez. And it was incredible that here is somebody who, is in the United States, who is originally from South Africa, who is, I think, somebody who is a treasure, a United States treasure, since actually taking over Twitter and fighting for everybody's right for liberty and freedom in the First Amendment, to finally say, you know what, let me go down to the border and check it out for myself. Let me see what is going on here. And really taking a good look at what is happening and exposing that to the whole world while he is there. And what he saw was absolutely mind-blowing. And he sat there with Tony Gonzalez looking at all the people sitting underneath the bridge on Zalduas Bridge. And how many times have I taken you guys to that bridge? How many times have you seen me on Sean Hannity's show going down to that area of the border and showing you what is happening from McAllen all the way to Eagle Pass? And you see these floods, waves of illegal migrants coming into the country only to be let go without even any really good national security checks, without any vetting, very little vetting. You see all the children and you wonder, how is any nation supposed to survive this? How any nation is supposed to survive this? Thousands of people pouring in daily, and these groups taking millions of your tax dollars, and there's no accountability whatsoever. It is a huge fraud, and it is happening on your dime. And I have Matthew O'Brien here to explain. I'm so happy to have you, Matthew O'Brien, here on the Sara Carter Show. I want to tell everybody a little bit about Matt. Matt and we really got a chance to get to know each other and everyone else that I think is true American patriots when we were in Israel. At the border, on the border tour with Tom Homan in Israel, trying to learn from our Israeli allies and partners what it is like for them to protect their border. Obviously, these are two different nations, but you can also see that the Israelis take their border security very seriously. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, Matt, but I want to tell people how amazing you are. You're the director of investigations, and you're responsible for overseeing the Immigration Reform Law Institute's specific investigations into fraud, immigration reform law. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and abuse. You've also covered other misconduct in basically the application enforcement of America's immigration laws. You have that experience because you understand what the role of an immigration judge is, what the role of lawyers are in these cases, what the role of the United States government is when it comes to protecting the U.S.'s national security at the border, as well as what it means in the general sense on the humanitarian levels of what we've seen, this enormous humanitarian crisis at our border. Prior to you joining IRLI, you were also an immigration judge. You were sitting on the U.S. Immigration Court in Arlington, Virginia. So thank you so much for being a part of the show and agreeing to come on and share all your information. Explain to people, because I think this is important to understand, what an immigration court is like, what it's like to be an immigration judge. And then, there's giant loopholes in our system, but what that entails, because one of the issues that I've had to deal with over my career as a journalist was dealing with adjudicators. And the adjudicators in ICE, for example, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, would tell me they were forced to approve people into the country that they knew should not be here. And then a majority of the people that were sent to the court system just disappear before they even get to you.
Well, this is the essence of what people mean when they say deep state or when they talk about regulatory capture. So the immigration court is an administrative court, which means that it is a court-like tribunal, which is part of the executive branch. And its function is to make sure that the executive branch works fairly by reviewing things that the executive branch is supposed to do in a court-like environment. So the judges on the immigration court are not members of the judiciary. They're executive branch employees, and they don't have lifetime tenure. They're supposed to be independent in their decision-making, but I experienced a lot of subtle pressure to just kind of approve everything and not make waves. I'm Irish. That's not my mentality or my constitution. So I'm interested in doing what's right because it's right. But as far as the immigration hearings go, they're interesting. The American Immigration Lawyers Association would like to portray all these things as if they are a murder trial, where there is a presumption of innocence and you have a whole bunch of constitutional rights at stake. The reality of it is that it's a limited purpose hearing. And what it is it's very similar to a driver's license revocation. If you're a foreign national, you cannot be in this country unless you have received a license from the United States government to be here. If you don't have that, you're unlawfully here. If you have it and you violate the terms, then you're subject to having that license revoked. So this is not a right, it's a privilege. And so it's very much the type of limited function proceeding where you're looking at this from the perspective of the government has filed charges against a removable alien. The presumption is that the alien is here unlawfully and they have an opportunity to rebut that. So it's the exact opposite of what goes on in a criminal trial. There's no innocent until proven guilty. The government has a very low burden and has to establish that you are an alien and that you are subject to removability. And, or I should say, subject to removal. They have to prove removability, and that's it. And once they've done that, it falls upon the alien to either establish that that is inaccurate for whatever reason. They derive citizenship through their parents, or no, there was some kind of a clerical error and they actually do have a valid green card. They're not an illegal alien, things of that nature. And then the secondary question is, do these folks qualify for any relief, which they are and I hate to use the word entitled to, for which they might be eligible under the immigration laws of the United States. And most of that relief is discretionary, and for a variety of reasons, an immigration judge can say, no, I don't think this person's of good moral character. I don't think that this person merits this. What I experienced, though, was a little more distressing. So when I was a trial attorney with ICE, I heard applications from people. When I was the prosecuting attorney, I heard lawyers for the aliens come in and present asylum cases that were legitimate. I mean, these were people that, Jews that had been persecuted religiously in Russia, people that had, fallen afoul of the government in South Africa because of their participation in a particular disfavored political party. 99% of what I heard when I was an immigration judge had changed drastically. When I was a trial attorney with ICE, gang violence and domestic violence were crimes that other sovereign nations have an obligation to take care of. It's not the U.S.'s problem. Under the Obama administration forced the idea that Gang violence was an indication that the law enforcement authorities in a country were not in control of it, and that could be a basis for asylum, and that misogyny and anti-female feeling were a similar indication. Well, that's not true, and there's a mishmash of terrible court decisions that have led some places like the Fourth Circuit in Virginia to conclude that in some circumstances, these are appropriate bases for asylum, but the fact is that they're not. You talked about loopholes. One of the big loopholes in asylum law is you can get asylum because you were subject to persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Now you may say, what is membership in a particular social group? No one knows.
It could be anything. It could be anything. I talked to an ICE officer once. I gotta tell you this, that he said his mind was blown that this person even got to stay in the country because they asked him, why are you coming to the United States? And they were from China. And the person said, because I'm being persecuted for my belief as a Christian, because I'm a Christian. And they said, okay, what are some Christian holidays? And they said the 4th of July. They said the 4th of July, the 4th of July. And they're like, well, okay, yeah, no. But when they moved them on, that person eventually ended up getting a perfect, like a rubber stamp, you can stay in America. So do you think that the pressure from a particular government, like from the Biden administration, pressure from the Obama administration, is getting people just adjudicated into the United States without any like semblance of law and order, just whatever they say and you can come in?
Yeah, this is a gross abuse of authority. So they have essentially destroyed asylum. Asylum no longer serves as a protection for someone who has legitimately been persecuted in a foreign country because there's just no room left in the system. And those are a small percentage of the cases. It takes them forever to get heard. And, they're not the trendy thing. The fact is that you have a lot of extreme left-wingers on the immigration bench who aren't interested in the law. They're social crusaders. And so when someone says, oh, I was abused by not my husband, my live-in partner in Guatemala, that I have no proof that this person exists or that I ever cohabitated with them, and it's a misogynist country, so I couldn't go to the police and get protection. You have people who have such a narrow worldview that it's U.S. bad, alien good, that claim is perfect, I'm going to rubber stamp it, and this is evidence of my moral superiority. So you have to deal with that in the immigration courts. And then at the macro level, you have to deal with the fact that this is not an accident, Sarah. This is an organized plan that is trying to change the political complexion of the United States. And the reason I know this is there's two reasons. One, if everybody who was coming here in these caravans and these mixed groups was capable of organizing themselves without outside assistance as effectively as they have in making their way to the United States, they would have already fixed all of the political problems that they claim to be fleeing and the economic problems that they claim to be fleeing. And, we watched the Homeland documentary when we were in Israel and heard one of the ranchers in Texas say that, they saw all different operatives from NGOs and political parties and everything else explaining to people how to organize and come to the U.S. The other reason I know that this is not an accident is because the Biden administration has now abused the parole authority in the immigration law to bring all these people in. And just for your viewers, parole essentially is a legal fiction that says we're going to allow somebody into the United States, but fictionally, as a legal matter, they're still at the border. They've never entered the U.S. Now, for some strange reason, in Section 245 of the Immigration Act, you can apply for a green card based on a marriage or any other qualifying basis if you have been inspected and admitted to the United States or paroled. Now, how can you get a benefit on a parole when you're not really here as a matter of law? And what they've done is they have paroled hundreds of thousands of people who have no claim to being in the US. And those people now are all going to get married for immigration purposes. They're going to get jobs that really aren't ones that qualify for a green card. And then they're going to get rubber stamped through. They're going to get green cards. If you get a green card on the basis of a marriage to a US citizen, in 3 years, you can apply for naturalization. And then guess what? You can vote. So this is deliberate. It's devious. And it is designed to change the nature of U.S. government and the way we resolve political issues here in the U.S.
I'm so glad you got to this point, Matt, without even me asking you, because I think this is the biggest question that everyone has. So many Americans. We saw Elon Musk at the border. I saw all kinds of tweets, Elon Musk with Congressman Tony Gonzalez, people saying, wow, it appears that a South African cares more about the national security and humanitarian crisis at the border and our political system than most of our lawmakers do. And I think that's a pretty poignant point, because fundamentally, this is about changing America. But as an immigration judge and as a lawyer and understanding how things operate, this has always been the hardest part for journalists and investigative reporters to try to prove, right? We're trying to show tangible evidence of what is happening. It's happening right before our eyes. We know it's happening. We see it happening. And yet, everybody's like, well, that's elusive. You really can't say that. We're not really sure. But there's enough evidence to say, no, wait a minute. That is exactly what's happening. And then we're going to go quickly to the NGOs. But it is, right? I mean, do you believe that there is enough evidence that we could prove this, even if we were in a court of law debating this in front of a jury?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's piles and piles of evidence. This is very much like the current impeachment inquiry. The other side has said, "Oh no, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" As the evidence just piles up and piles up and piles up. But the fact is, they are exploiting the lack of information and the lack of reporting in the mainstream media on immigration issues in order to pull the wool over the American public's eyes. The fact is that the Supreme Court, in a case called EQ v. United States that was decided in 1892, said, as an incident to sovereignty, the United States, as an independent nation, has the unfettered right to decide who can enter its dominions, how long they can stay, and under what conditions. And that has never been overruled. It's actually been reaffirmed 2 times in a case in the 70s called Kleindienst versus Mandel, and then again in Trump v. Hawaii. And the disappointing thing about Trump v. Hawaii, which was definitely a win for Trump, but that was a case that the Supreme Court, under what's called the plenary power doctrine, which basically says the immigration power relates to the foreign affairs and the war powers. Therefore, the courts don't have any right to rule on it. It's inherent in the office of the chief executive. So the correct answer for that should have been, this is all settled. The court doesn't have anything to say on it. The Trump administration can do what it wishes in this circumstance. So this is definitely and this is true with the family separation. The other side of this issue tells lies as if they were the truth and uses the media to get the American public to believe them.
How do we hold anyone accountable then? If the federal government doesn't follow the rule of law set out and established, we're supposed to have these branches of government so that we can balance each other out, right? If they're ignoring the judicial branch, and if the judicial branch is then legislating for one particular party, where do the American people seek redress? Where do we go in an effort to stop this madness and protect our families, our children, and our sovereignty?
Well, the first step is, like I said before, take to the town hall meetings. The second thing that I think is important is pretty much anyone with a minimal investment in equipment can do what you and I are doing right now. IRLI now has a podcast called No Border, No Country. People need to get the word out, and people need to put this stuff into terms that their fellow Americans can understand. And that's what IRLI is all about. We understand that most people haven't nerded out with the magnifying glass on immigration the way I have for years. So they don't necessarily understand exactly how it should work. And what we want to do is we want to put that out there in a way that people who don't have a specialist background can understand it. So I think, it's important for people to exercise their rights, to go to the polls and vote, to show up at town hall meetings, to write letters to their legislators and say, hey, this is, I'm not happy with this. But even more importantly, to write letters of support to people like Congresswoman Spartz to say, hey, maybe I'm not in your district, but I agree with what you're doing. Please talk to more of your colleagues who are on this side of the issue and get them to take the same approach that you're taking. And then I think it's important for people to do things like we did and, go to other places and, see how they're dealing with this. And if you can't travel internationally, then, this is a easy to get around country. Go to the border and see what's going on. Go to places that have taken a more conservative approach to this and see what they're doing. And, if you can get abroad, that was one of the most fascinating experiences I have ever had being in Israel with you and Tom, because everything that I had believed about immigration and the way to control it was proven by the Israeli experience. Israel's situation is very similar to ours, down to the terrain. I mean, the borders we were at looked a lot like the southwest border in the United States.
Absolutely.
And they have put up walls, they have backed them up appropriately, and they have people that are serious about doing their jobs manning the walls, and it worked. And that's exactly what happened when the Trump administration had the wall up and let the Border Patrol do what it is supposed to do.
I absolutely agree with you. I found it just amazing being there in Israel and bringing those lessons home and then saying to myself, like, wow, it's so bizarre to watch how the Biden administration is reacting to the border and how little they care about the American people because of this ideology, which I absolutely believe is intent on changing the entire structure of our nation. The foundation is fracturing. We're watching it. I agree with you, Matt. Every one of us, every single one of you out there that is listening to Matt, listening to me right now, you all have this same power. This is yours for the taking. Our founding fathers gave you this freedom so that you could speak up. You don't need to just have a lawmaker speak up for you. If you don't have the person in power that's representing you that you believe should be representing you, you have a mouth yourself and you can speak out. You can join IRLI. You can donate money to them. You can give money to another lawmaker and say, I want someone else in power that's actually going to care about my kids. And before I let you go, I do have 2 or 3 more questions for you, Matt, because it's so amazing. We talked a little bit about, you touched on the NGOs. And we talked a little bit about non-governmental organizations. This is a big deal right now. And I hope IRLI does some digging into this too. We saw FEMA has been allocated all kinds of money to deal with the immigration and illegal migrant problem, somewhere over the course of $700 and something million plus dollars, 77 million separately this year alone. We've seen the DHS ask for a request of over 600 million. I mean, this is crazy amounts of money. And we see Americans, and all that money is going to be divvied up into different NGOs, different local state agencies as well. And the power of these NGOs is significant. We saw it with Catholic Charities. I'm a baptized Catholic. I go to church, the Catholic Church. I am not happy with what I have seen. And it's been horrible, I believe. I believe they're aiding and abetting in this movement of migration. And I've seen it with a lot of other NGOs in the region. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I can give you an example of this. So I had a case when I was an immigration judge, and there was an individual from Honduras, I believe, who had come into the United States unlawfully, had been involved in a bunch of criminal activity, relatively low-level stuff when he was here. But an immigration judge before me had gotten his case, and in the courtroom, he admitted under oath on the record, I killed the guy with a machete and I did 13 years in prison in Honduras for it. And the immigration judge said, well, bye-bye. He was removed from the United States, and a number of years later, when I was the immigration judge, he was back here in the U.S. Well, how did he get back in? he had been funneled along from Honduras back to the United States with the aid of for lack of a better word, I would call it like an underground railroad, a chain of NGOs that does everything from provide shelter, food, new clothing, water, backpacks, birth control, you name it, to all of these folks. A lot of them are spending money that came from U.S. government grants. Well, he gets in front of me in court, and there is a statute that says no U.S. taxpayer money is permitted to be used to provide representation for aliens in immigration court. It's a civil proceeding. Americans in civil proceedings don't get free lawyers. That's limited entirely to criminal proceedings. As we talked about earlier, immigration proceedings are not criminal proceedings, and they're not even similar to criminal proceedings. And yet this guy wound up with a free lawyer from the Capital Area Immigrant Rights Coalition. And they made the argument that I was obligated, because they believed that this guy was mentally ill, to ignore his admission on the record that he killed somebody and then grant him asylum in the United States. And then, to top it all off, when I denied this guy's application and ordered him removed, they filed a complaint where they actually lied on the record, and they said I had given them a half an hour to present their complex case and hadn't listened to anything that they said because I did not know the asylum laws. Now, of course, they had a little problem in that situation because there were 7+ hours of hearing tapes. And so this is the kind of stuff. This is taxpayer money paying for a logistical system that gets a self-admitted murderer back to the U.S. after he's been deported, and then gets him lawyers who violate their professional oath and lie on his behalf when he gets back into immigration court. And the only reason he was back in immigration court is because of the mental health claim and the ridiculous policies that the U.S. government pursues with regard to that. He actually could have been administratively removed by ICE with the filing of paperwork and no further hearing. So this is the kind of craziness. We are paying for our own demise through our taxpayer funds with the aid of organizations who have the best interests of foreigners, not U.S. citizens, at heart.
Kickstart a fresh fall routine with HelloFresh. HelloFresh handles all the meal planning and shopping to deliver everything you need to cook up in a tasty meal right at home. They do the hard part, and you get to take all the credit. When it comes to options, honestly, more is more. That's why HelloFresh's menu includes 40 recipes and over 100 add-on items to choose from every week. Go to HelloFresh.com/50 Sarah Carter and use code 50 Sarah Carter for 50% off plus 15% off the next 2 months. You can't beat that, guys. I made the most amazing pasta dinner for my family. It was so beautiful that I actually took a picture of it, and it tasted great. It was a dish that I normally do not make at home, so it was nice to try out something new, and everyone loved it. Go to HelloFresh.com/50 Sarah Carter and use code 50 Sarah Carter for, guess what? 50% off plus 15% off in the next 2 months. This fall, skip that extra trip to the grocery store and have dinner ready in no time with America's #1 meal kit. Again, save 50% plus 15% off the next 2 months when you order at HelloFresh.com/50 Sarah Carter and code 50 Sarah Carter. Is there any legal recourse that people can take, like legal recourse against the government? If something happens to my family, let's just say I'm in the mall, I'm shopping, and there is a soft target and there's terrorists that have set up a sleeper cell. They came across the border. Is there recourse for my family if something happens against the government, or are we're just left with what we're left with?
We're just left with what we're left with. Unfortunately, there's been a number of Supreme Court cases that have said that while the government has a duty to provide things like police and fire protection for the whole society, they can't be held liable for the failure to protect somebody in an individual instance. And then there are also limits on your ability, it's called standing in the courts, on your ability to sue about something as a citizen and a taxpayer. You normally have to have some kind of a greater stake in the outcome. And that's been a huge problem. There have been states that have played around with this and had taxpayer suit laws and have tried to redirect their courts as more of a check on executive branch power. In some cases, it works great. In some cases, it doesn't. But here's the thing now. At the federal level, we have a lot of courts that are completely out of control and run amok, and they're issuing decisions that have nothing to do with the actual laws that they're applying, particularly in immigration. So it's a crazy situation, but I still think the most important thing is for people to speak up. I think things are going to change in New York and Chicago because they have to, because people are spitting mad and they're not going to put up with it anymore. So hopefully we're starting to see the tide turn a little bit on this. But the most important thing is, listen, we're in America. We got that First Amendment right, and people should speak up and use it. The fact is that the Department of Justice really was forced to very quickly back off of their attempts to characterize parents complaining about the CRT stuff as domestic terrorists, because that just doesn't pass the smell test. Most Americans look at that and go, that's not remotely true. And, the fact is, most Americans also understand that we really don't have a big problem with domestic terrorism. We have a big problem with foreign terrorism. And so when Ali Mayorkas's Department of Homeland Security says that, the most significant threat to the United States is fundamentalist Catholics, it just doesn't even pass the laugh test. While meanwhile, he's letting people who we know are on the terrorist watch list and people with connections to the Iranian intelligence service and the Chinese intelligence services walk over the border. So the hypocrisy is starting to catch up, and hopefully people are getting mad enough at a point where we can still affect some positive change. I don't think it's gone too far. I think America is still America, and I think Americans reach a point where they're just not going to put up with it anymore. It's like the old 80s song. I'm revealing my age here, but we're not going to take it. And,
I want that to be true. I want that to be true. Where can people go to listen to your amazing podcast to learn more about what we can do to help protect our country? Because it's up to each and every one of us. And where can they go to see your website?
Sure. So our website is at www.irli.org, and there are links to the podcast on the bottom of the webpage. There's also links to all of our studies, news releases, and other publications. The podcast is also on YouTube and Spotify and Google Podcasts, as well as Buzzsprout. And so people can find it directly there as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the name of the podcast?
The podcast is No Border, No Country, because President Trump once put it very eloquently: if you don't have a border, you don't have a country.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on the show. If you love the show, rate the show, go to your favorite podcast, download it, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, give us 5 stars. Folks, I want you to follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.